Professor John Nicholson, Vice-Chancellor of the University, Ms. Bobby Holmes, founder of the Transition to Contemporary Parenthood program at the University, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. My name is Professor Graham Schaefer. I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the College of Science, Health and Engineering at the University. I would first like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land, of this land, and the custodians of the land in which our campus in Melbourne is built, and pay my respects to elders past and present. It's my pleasure to be the Master of Ceremonies this evening and to welcome you all to the 2015 Roberta Holmes Professorial Lecture presented by Professor Jan Nicholson. This evening we'll first hear from Professor Dewar, who will formally introduce Professor Nicholson. And at the close of Jan's presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions and to continue the discussion more informally. The formal part, that part of the evening will end at about 7:15, at which point I will ask you to join us at the Persimmon restaurant to continue the conversations informally with refreshments. It's now my pleasure to invite Professor John Dewar to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather this evening and pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's great to see so many people here this evening and welcome to this wonderful auditorium at the NGV. There may be some late arrivals. I gather that there is a Def Leppard concert at Rod Laver Arena. That means that none of you are Def Leppard fans, obviously. And much more appropriately fans of Professor Jan Nicholson, from whom we're going to hear later this evening. I'm delighted to be here tonight for the Roberta Holmes Professorial Lecture. And on behalf of the La Trobe University community, I would like warmly to acknowledge Roberta, who is here this evening. I thank her for her support of the university, as well as the tireless work she does to benefit the wider Australian community. Roberta's generosity has enabled La Trobe University to establish the Transition to Contemporary Parenthood program, which is undertaking research to identify the best ways to provide support to parents in the 21st century who are facing greater and more complex issues as parents than ever before. Bobby is one of a small, but I'm glad to say growing band of visionary philanthropists and benefactors who are supporting work at the university that matters greatly to them, but which also makes a profound difference to the wider community. So, Bobby, thank you. Tonight's lecture, Parenting and Work, Finding a Better Balance Together, Contemporary Solutions for Working Parents and Employers, is a very timely topic that I'm sure resonates with many of you on personal and professional levels. Speaking for myself, as the leader of an organisation that employs more than 3,000 people, I'm conscious of the need for employment practices that are flexible enough to meet the needs of our employees while supporting them to be successful in their careers. I realise that the world we live in is changing very rapidly, and we need to keep pace with new ways of doing things, and the sort of research that Jan does in her programme and in the research she'll be describing tonight is critical in enabling La Trobe as an employer, and I'm sure many other employers, to do just that. But I'm also the father of 3 young adult daughters, and like many of you, I'm sure I hope that they are able to work and have the choice to raise families of their own without experiencing all the stress and anxiety that many parents experience today. So tonight's Roberta Holmes Professorial Lecture is being presented appropriately by the inaugural Roberta Holmes Professor for the Transition to Contemporary Parenthood, Professor Jan Nicholson, who it's now my great pleasure to introduce. Jan was appointed to the inaugural Roberta Holmes Professorship in 2014 in our Judith Lumley Centre to establish a research programme around the transition to parenthood in contemporary society. She brings extensive experience in longitudinal studies of the effects of family, socioeconomic and institutional influences on the health and well-being of parents and children, and the development and evaluation of community-based programmes for preventing family-related health problems. Jan is a consortium advisory group member and design team leader for the Department of Social Services LSAC study, the longitudinal study of Australian children, and she's established a national group of early career and senior researchers examining the trajectories and effects of mothers and fathers parenting on children, mental health and the effects of mothers and fathers' work on parents and children, socio-economic inequalities in health and development, the determinants, trajectories and healthcare costs of common childhood disorders, including child mental health, language, literacy, obesity and oral health. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a very warm welcome to Professor Jan Nicholson.
Thank you, John. I would also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and any elders here with us tonight. For the first time in the history of what we regard as being the developed world, we're facing the prospect of the next generation having on average a shorter lifespan than their parents. Principally, this will be because of lifestyle-related diseases such as heart attack, diabetes, obesity, cancer, for men and for women. To prevent these totally avoidable prospects, my talk tonight is going to take us on a journey through parenting and child development, to propose to you that workplaces and employers have an economic and a social responsibility to be at the forefront of this prevention effort. To start my journey, I would like to introduce you to Liam, who was born in Australia last month. This photo gives us some glimpses into his future. What we can tell from this photo is that he has been born healthy and full term, with no evidence of any prenatal adversities that may impact on his physical development. Liam is being cradled in the hands of his father, suggesting that he has been born to two involved parents who have sought to capture their delight and their joy by commissioning a series of professional photographs. And given that his parents are able to afford to do this, it is probable that he has been born into relative prosperity. This photo hints that for Liam, he is born into broadly fortuitous circumstances with the likelihood of a nourishing and enriching childhood that will encourage him to grow and develop and reach his full potential. Not all children are so fortunate, and there are many things that may happen to Liam in his life journey that may disrupt this future. Supporting parents to raise the next generation should be a national priority. The health and the well-being of our nation depends on it. What I'm going to be doing tonight is considering a number of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know matters in parenting and some of the contemporary challenges that face parenting today. I'll discuss how parents' work experiences impact on their own health and that of their children, and highlight the place that workplaces and employers can play in securing a healthy environment for the next generation of Australians. Throughout, I will illustrate this with research that's been conducted by myself and my colleagues, and show how this research is informing our understanding about how we can view society and how it underpins our endeavours to strengthen our society in the future. One of the leading challenges of our time is how to ensure that all children, irrespective of their circumstances, get the opportunity to achieve their full potential. Inequitable opportunities are a constant. Some individuals are born into circumstances that nourish and extend, while others face challenges that hold them back. Of concern for Australia as a wealthy, developed nation, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is not only continuing, but it is widening. Growing up in Australia, or the longitudinal study of Australian children, which I call LSAC, is an important resource for helping us to better understand the impact of differing life circumstances on children and on the adults they will become. This study of 10,000 children from around Australia is allowing us to monitor the growth and the progress of the next generation. We follow up the LSAC children and their families every 2 years. You may be more familiar with LSAC through the TV series Life At, which was commissioned for the ABC to make in parallel with LSAC. LSAC has provided us with a clear and consistent picture of the impact of social disadvantage on children. Socioeconomic disadvantage, as measured in these sorts of studies, is assessed using a number of indicators, typically whether parents complete high school, their type of occupation, their household income. We can then divide families into levels of advantage, high SES, through to levels of disadvantage, lower SES. And what we see from LSAC is a very clear and a very consistent picture about how disadvantage impacts on children. What we have found is that from the first time we can measure socioeconomic status, there are differences in how children are doing. These differences are evident across their physical, their cognitive, and their socio-emotional health. They're generally stronger in terms of cognitive and socio-emotional health compared to physical health, because these are areas of development that are particularly sensitive to the quality of the physical and the emotional environment that children are raised in. This graph shows what happens when we look at children across multiple domains, and we look at whether a child has a physical health problem and a socio-emotional problem and a cognitive problem. What we see here is that by the time children are in the middle of their primary school years, there are marked differences in their overall development. If we look at children raised in the most advantaged families, what we see is that 7% of children have problems in all 3 major domains of development. In contrast, if we look at the most disadvantaged, 1 in 4, 25% of children have problems in all 3 domains of development. These children are facing very different nows in terms of how they're getting along with their peers, their teachers, their family, and they're facing very different futures in terms of what's going to be possible for them in their coming lives. To summarise this pattern which is seen across the developed world, the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, who are based in Washington, DC, summarised it in this way: that the need to address significant inequalities in opportunity, beginning in the earliest years of life, is both a fundamental moral responsibility and a critical investment in our nature's social and economic future. So, what do we do about this? Well, aside from a fundamental restructuring of society and the distribution of resources, one approach is to try and understand the mechanisms that underpin how socioeconomic factors impact on development and see whether you can change those. And again, LSAC and other studies, both here and internationally, give us some insights into this. And parents are the centrepiece of this story. Children's daily lives, their opportunities, are shaped by their parents. From pregnancy to adolescence and beyond, for most children, parents are the constant element of their lives. Even in adolescence and early adulthood, where we think that the peer group is highly influential, if you talk to young people, they report that their parents continue to be a fundamental source of support, information, and advice. And while it may not always be apparent, They are a continual point of reference in making life decisions. As such, a key way that socioeconomic circumstances impact on children and young people is via their effects on parents. When you are young, unprepared or poorly supported, when you're struggling to make ends meet, you're juggling multiple demands due to work, studies, caring for other children or caring for ageing parents, and when you lack the options to buy in domestic help or can't afford childcare, it's challenging to be the best, the most supportive, the most engaged parent possible. These factors impact on parents' abilities to look after themselves and to find the time to prioritise and protect what really matters. Daily interactions can become more irritable, parents can be less emotionally available, and time and energy, and in some cases the knowledge, is not there to be able to give children the most nurturing, enriching experiences. Who amongst us doesn't end up plonking the kids in front of the TV or putting on a video or a game on the tablet or the smartphone when things just get too much? Our research has illustrated how children's development is affected by their family environment. And I'm just going to show you some work. In this case, it's looking at children's behavioural and emotional problems, their socio-emotional development. In a study that we conducted in the late 1990s, early 2000s, we recruited a large random sample of children from the prep to year 3 classrooms in 28 Brisbane schools that were located in relatively disadvantaged neighbourhoods. We tracked the children over time to see which children went on to develop behavioural and emotional problems and what predicted this development. When we followed these children up 12 months after our first contact, we found that 32 in 1,000 children had a newly emerged behavioural or emotional problem. They were aggressive, disobedient, sad, or anxious. We were then able to statistically estimate how many of these cases of new behavioural or emotional problems could have been prevented if in an ideal world we were able to eliminate their exposure to various risks. Of interest in this relatively disadvantaged population, socioeconomic circumstances wasn't a major predictor. What mattered was exposure to adverse life events, change, parent mental health difficulties, family conflict, and parenting. They were the important factors. So firstly, if we looked at the prospect that we could eliminate all bad things happening to families and ensure that families are stable and don't change over time, 3 of our 32 new cases could have been prevented. If we were then able to eliminate parental distress, mood disorders, and conflict in the family, another 10 new cases could have been prevented. And finally, if we were able to eliminate bad parenting, 13 cases could have been prevented. So in other words, 40% of these children could have been protected from developing behavioural and emotional problems by addressing parenting, and another 33% by addressing parent well-being and family conflict. So what matters in parenting? What is good parenting or good enough parenting? Studies such as LSAC and other longitudinal studies, in this case the Time magazine was reporting on the Dunedin multidisciplinary study, which has been following children and their families for over 40 years. And really what we see is all they need is love and a little bit more than that. In general terms, children benefit from daily interactions that involve unconditional love and support, that is sensitive and responsive to children's needs and experiences, is fair and consistent and provides children with a sense of security, and that ensures their safety while allowing them to grow and take risks and to learn. To be able to do this, parents themselves need to know what to do, how to do it, and have the time and the practical and emotional capacity to do it. How this looks actually varies quite considerably. Parenting is a socially constructed phenomenon. Expectations of what parents should be and should do vary by country, by culture, and by resources. Historically, we were regarded as being a successful parent if your child survived childbirth and infancy and grew up to be a productive worker and contributed to the family's resources and produced the next generation. These days, we're much tougher on our parents. We expect that not only will children be safe and grow up healthy, but they will be provided with the opportunities to achieve their full potential in all areas of life. Our recent work has highlighted the pressure this places on the parents of today. We were commissioned by Vic Health to undertake a statewide study on the effects of parental fear and anxiety on whether parents allowed their children to be independent in the community, particularly to play and to move around within the community without adult supervision. What we found was that yes, parental fear shapes what children are allowed to do, but what we were a little bit surprised to hear was the strength to which parents were concerned about how they were perceived as parents and what was regarded as being a good parent. They didn't want to be the parent who was judged by others as letting their children roam wild. They didn't want to be regarded as bad parents because they let their children take risks. And it's really not surprising that parents feel like this, because our media is replete with messages about how parents are doing a bad job and getting it wrong. There is a whole new vocabulary out there, the tiger mums, the ones who are aggressive and push their children to achieve, the helicopter snowplow, or my new favourite, bonsai parents, who are trying to shape and manicure every part of their child's life and sweep away the challenges in front of them. These labels and negative images feature in our newspapers, our magazines, even our TV screens, where of course Super Nanny makes us all feel completely incompetent. For parents seeking help and advice, there's a plethora of online websites and blogs, many of dubious or unknown quality. Surveys here and overseas show that over 80% of parents and parents-to-be go online for their information about parenting, and 1 in 5 change their practices as a result of the advice that they get online. This is a concern given the quality of what is out there. A key exception to this is, in Australia, is the Raising Children Network, a federal government-sponsored website that provides parenting advice and resources informed by scientific evidence, frequently updated and rigorously reviewed by experts for accuracy. I'm going to come back and refer to RCN again later. So what have we looked at so far? So far, I've talked about healthy development being lifelong and parents playing a central role. Parenting is a strong and consistent predictor of how well children do, and these things are influenced by socioeconomic resources, parent well-being, and societal expectations. So where does work fit into this picture? I would like to put to you the proposition that paid employment undertaken by parents, parental work, in the way that it is currently configured, poses a threat to the health and well-being of parents, their children, and ultimately to the nation's economic prosperity. Just as the quote from the US Centre for the Developing Child admonished us that we have a moral responsibility to address socioeconomic inequalities, I will propose that we also have a moral imperative to address our approach to work. This is somewhat ironic, as the key policy response to the evidence that socioeconomic disadvantage is bad for children that has come from governments of all persuasions in Australia has been a response of promoting parental participation in the workforce. And the logic that they use is pretty obvious. If we get parents off welfare and into work, then these families will have more income, they'll have greater ability to purchase resources, and as well as contributing actively to the economy, it will be good for them, it will be good for the family, and good for the kids. I'm going to share with you now some research that not only is challenging this approach, but highlighting some of the inherent harms. But first, it's helpful to get an understanding of who we're talking about when we're talking about working parents. If you go online and try to find images of working parents, which I did, it's interesting what you find because this is a pretty typical image. A parent, usually a mother, working in a home office using technology with an infant or a toddler in the frame. A very white middle-class interpretation. The reality is quite different. We have much more diversity than that. Some mums and dads have desk jobs, which through advances in ICT means that they can do their work off-site. But there are mums and dads in the service industry who are cleaners, who are labourers, who work on farms, are miners, work in our schools and our hospitals, for large corporations or for small businesses. They may be new parents with their first child, or the parents of primary school or high school age children. On average, they'll be 30 years old when they have their first child. Their own parents are probably still in full-time employment, or they may be a member of what we call the sandwich generation, the primary carers both of dependent children as well as increasingly frail ageing parents. In Australia, working parents, 80% of women and 95% of men are employed when they have their first child. The norm is the dual earner family where both parents are in the workforce from when their child is quite young. Around the birth of the child, most men will take a few days off work and then return to work. Few will take more than a couple of weeks of parental leave. Fewer still will be stay-at-home parents. Many men will increase their work hours at this time to compensate for the loss of their partner's income. In contrast, women will take longer periods of parental leave, often staying at home for as long as they can afford. 40% of women return to work in the first year, most in a part-time or a casual capacity, and half report returning to work earlier than they would have liked. In Australia, 1 in 2 employees is a parent, and 1 in 3 of these will report conflict between their work roles and their family roles. In collaboration with Lyndall Strazdins and her colleagues at the ANU, we've been examining the influence of parental employment on parents and children. And I'd like to acknowledge that the work that I'm about to show you, quite a number of aspects of it have been led by Lyndall, as well as work from our own group here at La Trobe University. In this work, I'm going to show you that there are 3 aspects of parental employment that impact on children's development: parents' work hours, the quality of their jobs, and the ability to balance work and family demands. In our work, the first area we looked at was parental work hours, and an area of development that is particularly sensitive to the quality of the early childhood environment, namely children's language and literacy. Children's early language is shaped by their exposure to a wide variety and large number of words, both spoken and written. Being read to, playing word and rhyming games, singing songs, these are activities that, done on a daily basis, promote children's early language. In LSAC, we found considerable differences in these activities according to family socioeconomic status. Compared to high-income families, families with a low income spend on average 4 hours a week less time reading and in word-related activities with their children. 4 hours a week, that's a huge amount over the early childhood years. Looking at these patterns in relation to parental work hours, what we found was that this was actually not an issue of mother's work, this was an issue of father's work and income. While there was some reduction in the amount of quality time that adults in the household spent with their children when mothers worked, on the whole, families are able to protect this when the family has good financial resources and fathers work regular hours. The key decline in the amount of time reading to children occurred when mothers were working and fathers were working long hours. and the family couldn't afford to buy in or outsource extra help. This is one area where we have a clear policy implication that relates to dads. If we want to enhance the early childhood foundations for literacy, we not only need to look at family resources and skills, we also should be considering restricting fathers' work hours. Across childhood, we've seen a pattern that relates to the type of hours that parents work. And again, this is some work that it really gives us a pretty compelling picture. Working irregular hours when you are a parent has substantial flow-on effects to the home. Using Canadian data, Lyndall Strasdens has shown that when one or more parents works unsociable hours, evenings, weekends, or shift work, parents are more likely to have mental health problems, they're more likely to report high conflict in the family, there's greater use of impatient, irritable, and less responsive parenting, and they're more likely to have children with significant behavioural and emotional problems. While we have social structures that are important to families, childcare, health services, and schools, these are not designed to reflect the realities of the modern work hours for families. The expectations for employees to work outside of 9 to 5, outside of a 5-day-a-week schedule, will continue to present a challenge to families for as long as our services fail to recognise it. The next area that we looked at was the area of job quality. And the impact of job quality on employee health is not a new area of inquiry. Dating back to the seminal work of Geoffrey Rose, the grandfather of social epidemiology, and his student who is now Professor Sir Michael Marmot, and the Whitehall studies of the 1970s. This work provided evidence that linked poor job conditions to workplace injuries, a range of preventable diseases, and premature death. Good jobs are jobs that pay well, that offer security of employment, and that have good conditions. The employee has some autonomy in decision-making and how to do their work, has the ability to manage the pace and the demands of their work, and has access to paid leave and flexibility in hours. Bad jobs lack these features. They're low paid, they're not secure, and they have poor conditions. In Australia, poor quality jobs are often part-time and casual jobs, meaning that they're more likely to be jobs that are held by mothers than by fathers. The impact of job quality on employee health in Australia has been starkly illustrated by Dorothy Broom's work as shown here. This graph marks the proportion of working adults with a depressive illness against the quality of their jobs. Those workers with the best quality jobs on the right of the slide have the lowest levels of depression. What is confronting in these data are the rates of depressive illness for workers in the poorest quality job compared to those who are unemployed. We all know that unemployment is a serious risk factor for depression, and we see here that nearly 30%, 1 in 3 of unemployed adults have depression. But what we also see here is that 47%, nearly 1 in 2 adults working in the poorest quality jobs have a depressive illness. These data suggest that it is more damaging to be employed in a very low quality job than it is to be unemployed. So I would like to put to you the proposition that paid employment undertaken by parents, the way that it is currently configured, poses a threat to our social and economic well-being. Our data shows clearly that this applies to parents as well as adult employees generally. There is a consistent pattern across both mothers' jobs and fathers' jobs. We see that poor quality jobs are associated with poorer well-being, higher levels of stress, poorer coping. It impacts on the nature of the couple's relationship. They have lower satisfaction and more conflict in their relationship. And it impacts on the nature of their daily interactions with their children. Poor quality jobs make a unique contribution to these types of family outcomes. When we control statistically for other things that we know are related to difficulties such as parent mental health problems and poor family functioning, the effects remain for poor quality jobs. For example, amongst women in the postnatal period, working in a poor quality job is associated with a 40% increased risk of psychosocial difficulties after accounting for other known risk factors. Hours and quality combined with what is happening in the home contribute to what is known as work-family balance. Conflict occurs when parents struggle to meet the demands of their work lives in combination with their family lives, when they sacrifice or miss out on work opportunities, including promotions, because of their family responsibilities, or when they miss out on family things like children's sporting events or birthdays, or can't enjoy these events because of their work responsibilities. We've also looked at work-family conflict in a variety of ways, and again, we find that it impacts on children, and it's a story of both mothers and fathers. Across a number of pieces of work we've done, we've shown that work-family conflict is associated with poorer developmental outcomes for children. And primarily this is happening as a result of the impact of work-family conflict on the couple's relationship, the level of conflict in the home, and the way that parents interact on a daily basis with their children. If parents are experiencing higher conflict in their work and family roles, they're more likely to feel unsupported and cranky and fight with their partner. They're more likely to be feeling fatigued and anxious and worried. They're more likely to be irritable with their kids, to let them get away with bending the rules because it's just too hard to deal with it, or to plonk them in front of a TV screen. And of course, there's a feedback loop at play here. The more problems you have at home, the harder it is to cope at work, cycling back into a continuing cycle of work-family conflict. This is the classic example of a vicious cycle. What's happening in one context is making things worse in another context, and that feeds back in again. So in summary, parenting to the benefit of our children is a balancing act. From a developmental perspective, parental employment conveys the benefits of additional resources, primarily income, but also the personal fulfillment that you can get from one's meaningful employment. But it can come at a cost in terms of one's ability to provide children with the time and the quality required to support their optimal development. These challenges around employment are not equitably distributed. They're more common for mothers than for fathers, and for those with low income. So they're more common amongst our most vulnerable employees. So in summary, so far we've seen that parental work matters. It shapes the quality of the home environment, and it sets the boundaries within which child development occurs. These boundaries have lifelong consequences. The environment that children experience in their early life sets the foundations for later. While it's possible to recover from a poor start in life, if a child is growing up in an environment characterised by conflict with stressed, irritable, tired parents who are inconsistent and distracted, and the family has limited resources, as these children get older, they will fall further behind. Our data brings the work-family interface into central focus as a determinant of inequitable opportunities and a potential threat to the future generation. So what can workplaces do? What should they do? And why should they do it? I'm going to start with the why because that's in some ways the easier part of the story. Having employees who have poor work-family balance is costly to the bottom line. As a source of stress, depression and fatigue, it's associated with absenteeism, stress claims, turnover, loss in productivity, presenteeism, and presenteeism, which is being at work and continuing to work when you're not well. In some work that was done by Fiona Cocker and myself with Christy Sanderson at the Menzies in Tasmania, using the National Mental Health Survey data, we were able to estimate the costs to an organisation in terms of lost productivity and job turnover that arises from having employees who are absent from the workplace because of depression and employees who are present at the workplace while they have depression. And what we see is that per employee, the cost to the organisation of absenteeism is around $9,000 a year. Presenteeism, being at work while sick, costs the workplace around $8,000 per employee per year. There's an economic imperative for organisations to address this. And returning to my earlier slide, work is the universal setting for reaching parents. Most Australians are employed when they become parents, and a large proportion of our workforce are experiencing work-family conflict. So if we want to improve our supports to parents and we want to reach them in their everyday settings, work is an obvious place to do this. Our current work is showing that the effects of work-family conflict on parents, couples and children is worse when both parents rather than one parent is affected, and multiplies when work-family conflict is persistent over time. The good news is that our data also show that if parents get out of a situation of experiencing work-family conflict, then all the aspects of family life that are harmed by it start to revert to normal levels. So this is an opportunity to make a difference. So what would we do? Work-family conflict is what Fiona Stanley would describe as a wicked problem. Wicked problems are those that are entrenched in social structures and have multiple causal factors. Wicked problems are not able to be solved by a single sector or professional group working in isolation. They require linked up, coordinated strategies across multiple sectors, multiple individuals, and multiple parts of the community. Workplaces and employers cannot resolve this alone. So what should our linked up multi-sectoral solutions look like? When I was planning this talk, I was going to start off by talking about what working parents themselves can do. But this morning I did talk back radio with John Fain on the Conversation Hour, and our callers were overwhelmingly focused on the individual solutions. And it was clear that the solutions that they were describing, things like taking a leaf change is moving to the country, mums or dads being stay-at-home parents, or leaving the corporate world to move into consultancy. These are all solutions that are only available to certain parts of society. If the individual focus alone is our approach, we will continue to entrench inequalities with those who are able to finding solutions, while those with the least resources and most vulnerable families will continue to bear the burden. Flexible hours and working from home, these are not options when you work in the service industry or for a family business or in a hospital. To make meaningful differences across the population, we need leadership and innovation from the organisations and structures that support or undermine family lives. At the broadest level, this needs to start with our government. We need state, federal and local governments to lead the way. We need industrial, economic and welfare policies and regulations that are scrutinised and reformed to ensure that they are supportive of working families. Irrespective of the structure of that family, whether it's one parent, two parent, same-sex, extended kinship, irrespective of family income, and irrespective of where families live. We need to examine what the Scandinavian countries are doing that works so well and work out how we can adopt and adapt some of these strategies to make better support for mothers and fathers, in particular better access to paid parental leave that is a norm for both women and for men. And we need the services that are meant to support families. The health services, childcare, education and welfare to be structured and accessible to families who work long hours, weekends, evenings and shift work. Imagine that. From the perspective of the workplaces to lead the way, there need to be strategies in place across multiple levels of the organisation. This includes supports and resources for those in crisis, but in addition, we also need, in addition to the ambulances sitting at the bottom of the cliff, we need fences at the top to prevent our employees from falling. This includes things like providing training for supervisors on how to manage work-family balance within their teams, reforms that will enable quality conditions for all, that embeds flexibility and leave options and doesn't actively work against these by penalising the careers and prospects of those who access these options. They need leadership within the organisation who are role models for work-life balance and make it okay for men as well as women to respond to family demands. And imagine if organisations were able to use the great potential that they have through their e-learning platforms to make high-quality, evidence-based resources like those provided by the Raising Children Network available and accessible to everyone. We need to move beyond an employee focus on balancing work stress to using the resources and the systems of the workplace to find solutions to preventable work-family conflict. The vision is workplaces as the new community that support employees to be the best they can in all the important roles of their lives. Our challenge to government and to industry is to be the one to step up and be prepared to make a difference. Our challenge to ourselves as a university is to work with government and industry to find ways to make that happen. So returning to the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, I'd like to close with their comment or their description. The future of our society depends on its ability to foster the health and well-being of the next generation. Today's children become tomorrow's citizens and workers and parents. When we invest wisely in children and families, the next generation will pay that back through a lifetime of productivity and responsible citizenship. When we fail to provide children with what they need to build a strong foundation for healthy and productive lives, we put our future prosperity and security at risk. I would like to end tonight by acknowledging the large number of people who have supported the work that I've been presenting. In particular, our key funders, including Roberta, Holmes, and the various institutions that I've worked for currently and in the past. I'd also like to acknowledge Angela Taft and the wonderful people in the Judith Lumley Centre and the Transition to Contemporary Parenthood team. I hope I managed to cover all of my co-authors and the people who have been very special in supporting my career over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. And thank you for a really interesting and challenging and at some stage confronting presentation. It was fascinating. We now have an opportunity for a few questions. There is a roving mic because we are recording this evening's session, and it's important that you have the mic so that we can capture what it is that you ask. Can I also ask that you actually frame it as a question and not as a continuation of the lecture? And on that note, I get to ask the first question.
Thanks, Graham.
You talked about that the expectations on parents are increasing, and one of the factors that are increasing was the simultaneous need now to care for and manage elderly parents as well as children, and working people may now have family members in childcare and aged care simultaneously. How is that impacting parenting?
I think that is making it a lot tougher. What we're seeing is kind of a bit of a double-edged sword. While your parents are healthy, your ageing parents are healthy, they're likely to still be working. So they're not necessarily close by or available to provide help around the family. But when they're not working, then the chances are that you're going to see their health declining. And as we have smaller families, there's more responsibility on a fewer number of children to really be supporting that.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions?
Julie Green from Raising Children Network. Thank you, Jan. That was so stimulating. Can I perhaps ask you to elaborate on what you see we need to explore and unearth about the role in workplaces for digital technologies to connect with parents, and perhaps to create the conditions for parents to do something that is really, really important, and that's the ability for them to be able to enjoy their children?
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. That's a lovely way of putting it, because I think that is one of the challenges, is when you're juggling so much, one of the things you lose is the ability to enjoy your children. Increasingly, I guess our social supports and our social community is coming from two places these days. One is from our workplaces, and the other is from our social connections online. The digital world is changing how we interact with our world around us. It's giving us more support, and it's also giving us more criticism. And I think we're at the stage now where we really can start to think a lot more cleverly about how we use the digital world to support parents in their role. And if you want to find a way of delivering that systematically widespread, then providing that through the workplace seems to me to be one way of doing that. I think we've got quite a bit of work ahead of us to think about how you would tailor that content, how you would structure it so that it fits with work. But I think that's a possibility we need to be open to.
Thank you, Jan. Thelma Palbers and Associates. I'm a lawyer in private practice and a Trobe alumni. My question would be, is from a family law perspective, has your research considered the impact of a family breakdown on the children's development? Because as a family lawyer, that's what I have to deal with when families do break down and end up in court or a similar situation. And the second part would be cultural diversity, which is another area that I'm very interested in, cultural diversity in the law, especially family law. But also, given that these parents are from low socioeconomic background and also employment, how does those factors and cultural diversity impact on the child's development? And when you have those factors as well as a split up in the family, it makes it even worse. And they're the type of problems I have to deal with every day as a family lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's a simple word. I guess tonight what I was focusing on is one aspect, a universal aspect of our lives that impacts on the well-being and the potential of the majority of parents. Family breakdown and family reformation, so step families, have a profound impact on what the nature of the home is, the opportunities for children. Sometimes it can be really positive and beneficial, and the types of cases that I'm sure you see through your practice are the cases that can be really harmful and really damaging. So I think that's a whole other area that is very important. We have programs of research in the Judith Lumley Centre that are looking at the impact of family and domestic violence on women and children. Part of our work is trying to understand how that disrupts parenting. And we also have a large program of work going on looking at the health and well-being of women from migrant and refugee backgrounds. My other colleagues could talk more about both of those if you're interested. I could introduce you later.
Thank you, Jan. That was a fantastic talk. My name's Sheena Riley, and I am interested in how you think we could be directing parents to the right resources, to the evidence-based resources. So you talked a little bit about doing that through the workplace, and I think that's a terrific idea, but how do you get people from non-evidence-based and, dare I say, nonsense blogs to fantastic resources like the Raising Children's Network?
I'm sure that's a problem that Julie struggles with all the time. and I think that is an issue. one of the ways that I think we need to be more effective in using those resources is through all of the services that wrap around families, and making sure that our professionals are aware of what's out there and what's good and how they can access and use them. Because I think you're much more likely to want to use and to trust in a resource that's been introduced to you by a trusted professional. So your GP, your maternal and child health nurse, someone in the childcare centre. That's probably the best way we can do it. So it's about educating our professionals and our family support workers about what's available that's good quality, reliable, evidence-based, and how to introduce it and use it with their clients.
Hi, thank you very much, Jan, for your talk. I grew up in a very immoral, sexually immoral environment, and that had a huge impact on not just myself, but 2 of my friends suicided. I've got 3 children, and that's probably my biggest concern as a parent, of leaving them to go about, for whether they walk to the bus stop or anything, is will they be followed? Will they be attacked? It's those sorts of things, especially when I have been chased down a dark alley with by somebody. You know, it's so how do you how do we create a better and safer environment for our children? That's, I guess, as a parent, that's my biggest concern as a worker.
Thank you for that question. That's certainly an issue that we were trying to tackle with the Vic Health, the research that we were commissioned to do by Vic Health. And the final stage of that work was working with representatives from a number of organisations to try and identify what are some of the strategies and what are some of the approaches that help make the environment safer for children. And we did some very practical, looked at some very practical, sensible solutions. So things like how you teach children stepped up safety practices. So you start off with them walking to school with adults and then with other children, that type of thing. But we also did some kind of blue sky work as well, and we're talking about it's time that we reclaimed communities for families and children. Maybe we should be blocking off streets and dumping dirt in the middle of the street and just leaving it there for the kids to get into, and create bike ramps and get children back out playing, rip down front fences so that our environments are communities where children and families are active and owning it, and everyone knows everyone's children and looks out for everyone's children. If we had simple, easy solutions, I'm sure we would have done it by now. I would say that one of the things that is important is that parents are aware of the risks in their environment and that they parent accordingly. So we've seen in our work with LSAC that there is a higher degree of overprotective, over-anxious parenting amongst mothers from more impoverished backgrounds, and that's not associated with a harmful effect on children. That's good parenting.
There was a question on the right.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. That was a fantastic talk. It seems to me that what you're trying to sort of scope out is like a preventative health agenda, which is really talking about family health. And so there's really terrible problems like abuse and parenting difficulties and family breakdown and conflict, and we can craft services to mop that up. But what I think you're trying to speak to is how might we start to change some of the things that are pushing families down into these dark alleys, right? So here's my question to you, because I mean I think this is so hard to do, and I guess I'm inviting you to do a bit of utopian thinking here. What's your picture? What are some of the things that you would like to see happen that might start to change some of these things that are sort of way back, pushing into families and starting to direct them, as your research shows, in terms of greater rates of marital conflict, more hostile and irritable parenting, all that poorer mental health, all those things that we know then can end up in some very bad places for family health.
Thank you, Lyndall. That's Lyndall Straston, who's my colleague who works in this field, so I feel like I should just be flicking that one straight back. What are our blue sky ideas, Lyndall? I think what we want to do is look at what are some of the really good solutions that some of the big industries have in place for their white-collar executives. How do we get that down onto the factory floor? How do we acknowledge that people work in the service sector, and for those people to be able to access the GP, to have childcare that works, we need services that are also working a 24-hour, 7-day economy. We need to get out of this notion that we're going to change the way that people work. We need to change the services and the supports to make it better for those who don't have a choice. That's a little bit of my blue sky.
Question at the back.
Hi, my name's Johanna Hayes, and look, I'm a manager of about 150 staff, and I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I never really realised what it meant to an employee to leave at 5 o'clock until I've had my child. And I think that that's something that's really important, and even to get someone to come along here with me tonight, because I had a guest ticket, had to ask 10 mothers, and the reason why they couldn't come was it's just too hard. And I think that, it's really, that these are the realities. And look, the last response and your question was the blue sky thinking, but how do we make it easier, and how do we make it that when I get home, because I get home late, because I don't manage my time as efficiently some days, that hour is really crazy, and I'm not getting those 4 hours even of reading to my child, that data is there. And I don't think I've got any issues with parenting, but I think sometimes the realities of parenthood and working are hard.
They are.
But they're wonderful too. So if you've got any other thoughts to that, but they're just really the realities sometimes.
They are hard. And I think it's interesting, your comment at the start about you didn't realise what knocking off at 5 o'clock meant until you had a child yourself. And I think that's really telling, and I think that's where we can do a lot better in terms of the knowledge and the skills of those people who are in more senior positions within organisations to really understand that this isn't an option, this isn't a luxury that you need to be able to pick your child up from school, but then to be able to work out how you negotiate that within a team environment so that other people don't feel like they're constantly having to pick up and compensate. This is not easy stuff. It has flow-on effects right through. And that's where I think we really need to do some good stuff around manager and supervisor training and support so that we can see what is possible. Because if we just continue the way it is, things are getting harder. And if we look at our young people as they're growing up, a lot of them are saying, I don't want to do what you do. I don't really want that life.
Thank you, Jan. I would have one final question.
And this is a bit naughty because I'm another colleague of Jan's. I'm Rhonda Small at the Judith Lumley Centre, but I couldn't resist, especially after that last comment. Today is Going Home on Time Day, and I think we should all know that. And we're not saying we shouldn't be here, because I think this is part of the rest of life. But I'd also like to say, or ask you, Jan, where do you think there's a place for lobbying for shorter working hours for parents? Because in the end, there are 24 hours in the day, and children need time, and people are trying to work, develop their careers at the same time as they're having children. You know, where's the place in society for shorter working hours? And some of the Scandinavian countries, of course, have built in the right to shorter working hours, but you've got to have a community support for that, and people have got to be able to survive on working shorter hours too. So I just thought I'd put that in.
I agree. I think it's critical. I think there are many of us who work way over a 40-hour week. And again, the discussion that I was participating in this morning was about, employees need to take control and turn their phones off and not answer the text message that came through at 9:30 at night about a work-related matter. Well, yes, that's one thing, but also that message should never have been sent at 9:30 at night. We all have to recognise this and jointly work out the multiple ways that we can address it. As I said, this is a wicked problem. There is no single simple answer, but if we whittle away at a bit here and whittle away at a bit here, then hopefully all of those bits somehow will help to move us back towards a better place than where I think we are at the moment.
Thank you, Jane. And given that it is now 7:20, following that, I think it's time to draw this to a close. Thank you again for a really fascinating lecture and interesting conversation. You talked about the contemporary challenges that we face as parents and as employers, and the impact of socioeconomic disadvantage on children's outcomes, on their physical, their mental, their emotional health. You talked about the challenges facing us as parents and as families, and indeed as employers, and the challenges for us as a nation. One of the things I heard that was a little scary for me was that it's more damaging to be in a poor job than it is to be in no job at all. But I did learn a few new interesting terms, including snowplow parent and bonsai parent. And the other thing I heard, which I wish you'd told me 26 years ago, was the need for fathers to restrict their work hours. But what was also pleasing is you didn't just talk about the problems. You also, based on your deep research, and developed a set of solutions. And evidence-based solutions to what really is a wicked problem. So thank you very much for a fascinating evening.
Thank you, Beth.